Welcome to Tripod, our travel retail themed video podcast series in association with the Siva Group. I'm Martin Moodie.
I'm Roger Jackson.
Roger, again, it's good to be back with you, and we got a brilliant guest coming on the show soon, but I thought I'd just kick off. It's a while since we've talked by asking you how your business is, because your business is a very good reflection of the business at large in the wider travel community. So how are things tracking?
Yeah, I think business is good. We're coming to the end of quarter one for our business because we're an annualized business, and I think not just ours, Martin, but how I see the whole industry is that we're getting back to a decent level of availability. There are still some challenges, but some of those existed pre-pandemic anyway. Things like aged whiskey is one example. Because obviously, as we know, there's just not enough aged whiskey. They weren't making whiskey in the quantities 30, 40 years ago that we now require as a world. So I think looking at the availability issues that travel retail specifically found over the last 24 months, I think a lot of that has cleared up. Not all, but I would say sort of 80%. So I think what we're now seeing is really well-stocked airports again. I think some of those pictures that were floating around in all companies and online of empty shelves and empty perfume and cosmetics units. I think I've traveled myself this week. I've traveled to quite a few locations this week in North Africa and Middle East, and I've seen really well-stocked shelves, Martin, which is definitely different versus last year, different versus 2022. So I think I've spoken to a number of retailers this week, and they're all saying the same thing, which is, recovery versus 2019 levels might be a little bit too soon for 2023. But they're all saying the same thing: is they could just recover, or it would be early next year where they get that full recovery. And looking at IATA and their forecasts, it feels like everyone's sort of in the same place. It's late 2023, early 2024 for a full recovery. Passenger numbers still aren't there. I think when you look at most airlines, they're at that sort of 75-80% level, but optically it feels like at a higher value. I wouldn't say I've got the data points to confirm that, Martin, but the cost of flights is still pretty high. But on the flip side, what we've also seen for the industry, we've seen that freight has really come down. So for those who listen to our podcast and who don't have much knowledge on freight is down by about 50%. So now, in fairness, it had tripled or quadrupled in some instances. So it's still got some way to go. It's still at a high. But to have already dropped 50-60% is a big move. And obviously with travel retail, given our large geographic expanse of our model, freight is very, very important for travel retail. It really can impact price and time and availability. So I think we've got some headwind. Obviously still some challenges to come, because we all look back at 2019, but as we know, we wanted big growth for our industry. We didn't want, in 2019, we all weren't happy with the size of our industry. We all wanted to double it or triple it. So I think some challenges to come, but it feels like we've got lots of blue sky in the distance.
Yeah, it does indeed. And a very interesting interview my colleague Dermot Davitt did with Colin McLaughlin from Dubai Duty Free, Roger, a week or so ago, and you saw Colin saying that they are very confident of exceeding 2019 levels this year, which were around the $2 billion mark. They should get to 2.1, 2.2 this year. Of course, some of that is accounted for by price rises, but it's a pretty good number considering where Dubai Duty Free was over the last couple of years. So all pretty good news. All right, well, as I said, we have a top class guest here, our first guest on the show, appearing from Australia. So let's bring her in, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
So this episode of Tripod's special guest is Susan Gray, very well known, popular, a well-regarded figure in the travel, retail and aviation worlds. Susan is speaking to us from Sydney in New South Wales, Australia. Well, Susan's the Managing Director of CPI Australia, the acronym standing for Concession Planning International. It's a highly successful business that approaches terminal planning from a commercial and a customer service perspective, proposing solutions that CPI feels will deliver the best possible revenue to the airport while supporting the airport's passenger experience ambition. She's also a highly successful hotelier. Much more of that in a moment. But first, Susan Gray, welcome to Tripod.
Thanks very much. That sort of sounds very impressive when you put it like that, but I'm not sure about the successful hotelier bit. Accidental hotelier, I think, more like it.
All right, well, we'll find out more, as I say, as the show goes on. But I'm going to pass over to my partner in Tripod Crime, Roger Jackson. Roger, over to you.
Hi, Susan. Great to meet you.
You too.
Susan, we always start off from where it all began for you. So could you just give us a bit around early days, where you grew up, early career, interests, those types of things, just for us to get to know you a little bit?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the southeast of England. My dad worked at Gatwick Airport. He was one of the first commercial directors, I guess, of Gatwick. So we moved to a village called Cranley in Surrey when I was young. But actually, my family are all Scottish. I was the sort of first generation to be born in England, and I feel very Scottish. I know I don't sound very Scottish, but I am at heart Scottish, and I've still got lots of family and lots of extended family there. When I was young, we used to go there for Christmas and holidays. So really a very strong connection with Scotland, and before that, Ireland. A lot of them were from Ireland originally. And I do feel a really strong connection. I feel like I'm going home when I go back to Scotland, which is odd because I've never lived there. So I have a very strong connection to airports. So my father was in airports for many years, and as a commercial director, and then he set up this consultancy firm. But actually, his father was he was the chief fire officer of all the UK airports at one point. So I have kind of got airports in my blood a little bit.
When did you start moving around the world?
Well, I went to Nottingham Trent University. I did international relations, and I loved it. I thought perhaps maybe one day I would be some sort of work for, Amnesty International, do something very worthwhile, and for a big NGO. And then when I was at university, my holiday job was in the duty-free shop at Gatwick Airport because it paid really well because it was shift work. And so I did the drive, stupid o'clock in the morning and stupid o'clock at night, in all the holidays for Orders International back then. That's how long ago it was. And so I was at uni in Nottingham, and then when I finished uni, I got my first proper job with PPS Publications. So many people will probably know Paul Hogan, who does the FTE conferences and the routes. I think he does routes as well. So Paul at Hogan actually gave me my first job in publishing in Reigate, and he was a great boss, and he was a very supportive, and he really sort of put a lot of effort into teaching us how to write and edit, and he also gave us lots of opportunities to go and travel. So in my first overseas gig as a journalist in this industry was to go and interview the CEO of Burgas Airport in Bulgaria in 1997. So off I went with terrified, with a packet of I remember I had a packet of biscuits in my suitcase that my mum had thrown in there at the last minute. She wasn't sure what the food would be like in Bulgaria. And I remember Paul ran a very tight ship, and I remember he told me that I wasn't allowed to drink anything out the minibar in the hotel, because he wasn't going to pay for it. I mean, I wasn't allowed to have any expenses. I'm not sure if he's still like that. But so I remember being there for several days, absolutely parched, wanting to just even, I was like, well, I can't even have a bottle of water out this minibar, and surviving on a packet of biscuits because I was terrified to eat all this foreign food that I had never seen before. So I didn't travel when I was a kid. We used to go to Scotland on holiday. So that was the most exotic it ever got.
your role with PPS. You mentioned your dad, Frank Gray, of course, very, very well known in the airport and the travel retail world, through Gatwick, through BAA, and founding the company, Concession Planning International.
Yes.
Was that link what led you to a travel related publication, i.e. with Paul at PPS, and then we'll talk about where you went after that, because that's an interesting step on.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I grew up, I mean, I used to go to the Queen's Building at Heathrow and watch the planes at weekends when I was very young with my dad. So, I mean, airports were sort of always around me and I was always around them. And my brother's a police officer, not interested in airports at all, but I always had a real interest and affinity for airports. But I was an avid reader when I was young, and I really thought I might, journalism really appealed to me when I finished uni. So the job with Paul was great because it sort of combined two sort of interests, and it does suck you in this industry, as you both know. You kind of join it and you never really leave. And Paul had a contract with ACI at that time, so I was very lucky because I was exposed to, I would go and interview, you know what it's like, Martin, you're sitting in front of, these very experienced, very knowledgeable airport CEOs and commercial directors, age 21, telling you, all about their strategy and their successes. And it was fascinating to have that level of access to some very, very senior people at such a young age, which people within their own organizations probably didn't have. So I really, it sucks you in, I think. And I never really have ever wanted to work in any other industry.
Oh, and you obviously learned very fast and very well. You're a very good listener, which I think is, the key trait actually of a journalist. Yes, you have to be able to write, but to get the story, you have to be from people. You have to be able to listen. So you moved on then, pretty interestingly for me, I remember it well, to work with Doug Newhouse. I would say the legendary Doug Newhouse, really the pioneer, the father figure really of, I think, quality journalism in travel retail B2B. I think it was called duty-free business in those days, now travel retail business. Is that right, Susan? But that was your next move. Tell us about that, and how you enjoyed those years.
It was duty-free business, DFB. And again, I mean, Doug was a great guy to work for. He was a proper, he should have been he was a real hack. He should have been on Fleet Street, doing his thing. I mean, he was a very professional journalist, as you all were at that time. You're sort of the old, what dare I say, the sort of the elder statesman of the industry, I guess. You and Doug, and he was great to work for. Again, he gave me lots of freedom and lots of opportunity, and there was this healthy kind of competition. It was healthy competition between all the titles in the industry, but it was also lovely because everybody got on, and he had to get on because it's a small industry, and we all ended up at all the same press events and at the same conferences and shows. And so, you not only got exposure to people that you worked with directly, like Doug, but also, people like Adele Wolstenholme and John Rimmer and Alex Smith and, and Dermot, of course, and of course, Lois and Paul over in the US. So there was a real community there. And the other thing was, it was a fantastic job. You got to go to the most amazing places. I mean, I still sometimes can't believe that I've traveled the world pretty much exclusively on other people's dime, and had the most amazing experiences. And as a young person in your 20s, I mean, what an opportunity. So I think we were all very lucky, and I still talk about some of those experiences even now, and some of them were quite a long time ago. So.
We were very successful in those days. I have to say there was a slight feeling of relief when you left, Susan, because you were so damn good. And you and Doug were a very formidable team. And you're right in what you say about him. Doug and I had an interesting relationship. Boy, were we competitive with one another, but we had immense respect, if you remember. And we'd often go for a drink behind the scenes that nobody would realize because they thought we were all almost always coming to blows. But we had many a good lunch or cocktail together. And I kind of miss Doug's competitive element. Actually, you need competitors. You might not always like them, but you need them. And boy, Doug and you really kept us up to the mark, and I think we all made better journalists out of one another through that. Yeah.
We did. It was a great time, and we all, I mean, yeah, all the publications were doing a fantastic job. I think I'm proud of. In fact, I still had, because it was old magazines, you know, the old-fashioned, you know, hard copies, but only back then, and only until very recently, I still had loads and loads of back issues that I, you know, that with, you know, you never quite get tired of seeing your own name on the cover of a magazine. You know, it was. I'm proud of it, and also I'm very proud of the baseline it's given me from a writing and editing perspective, because that's a skill that you always need, and you know, it's always a useful background to have in everything else I've done since. You know, what a great skill to be able to edit stuff and sub-edit stuff, and I'm sometimes a bit of a harsher critic than others, I suspect, but I think it was a great basis for moving forward, and what else I've done, you know, subsequently.
Susan, you then moved into the F&B side of the travel retail industry, which is a bit different to where you were with SSP, where you were there nearly 6 years. Any particular memories of that role and that time?
It was very different being in that corporate environment, and again, really insightful. We were a global head office of a truly global business, and a growing business, and to be in that sort of head office function was quite an interesting perspective on the rest of the business. But I was very lucky. I mean, I was responsible for international communications, and ended up actually doing 2 whole rebrands of the business while I was there. So I ended up overseeing some actually pretty big projects. In fact, the current brand of SSP is still the brand that I rolled out, and then I also did an awful lot of work on the sort of new business development. So we did a lot of support of the emerging markets businesses where SSP didn't have an established in-country resource. We provided that sort of expertise from the global office. So, you know, I suppose I didn't realize it at the time, but again, you know, looking back, it was amazing insight for me, because I worked on RFPs and you know, tender processes for businesses all around the world, sometimes going there and working with the team, and sometimes just doing it all from the UK office. But, you know, the insight and the level of understanding that I took away, again, set me up for moving on when I did, and went into the consulting side of things. So, you know, you really can put yourself in the position of the operator when you've spent so long, you know, being one, when you're working for an airport.
And then the move to Australia, and obviously, you know, on the concession planning international with Australia, continuation, I believe, from your dad. How was, I guess, Australia and the move, and then obviously then the move into more of the family business?
Yes. Yeah, it came around very strangely. I found myself consulting and commuting from England to Delhi every 2 weeks, working on the new terminal at Delhi, and realised that I had, for a huge level of flexibility, I was getting work literally on the other side of the world. So I don't actually have to be in England anymore. And because I was consulting with this group of a group of freelance consultants who were all brought together on this project, I realized that I could actually go and live anywhere. So I went on holiday to Sydney, because I was on my own. I thought, where can I go in the world that I'm a woman on my own on holiday for a week? Where will I feel safe, but I can explore? I don't want to lie on a beach. Where can I go? And I had never had any interest in going to Australia. I love New Zealand. I travelled extensively in New Zealand, and I'm a big hiker. I love long hikes, so, you know, multi-day hikes. So I just fell in love with New Zealand. So I just assumed one day, if I ended up living anywhere, I'd live in New Zealand. And I went to Sydney for a week, and I just hung out, and it was just fantastic. I loved it. I loved the people were friendly. The weather was great. It's such an accessible, interesting, multi-cultural and diverse city. There's loads to do. There's always something happening. And I thought, you know, why not? Why don't I just go and do it for a year and see how it goes? So I moved the business. My dad was still running the UK business. I kind of set up an Asia Pacific, Australian, New Zealand business. and started working out of Sydney. And around about the same time, I met Jeremy, who is Australian, actually has dual nationality with the UK as well, but you know, got to know him, and then before we knew it, 12, 13 years, I'm still here.
And is it, we spoke before about me obviously living in Dubai, and you asked me, you know, am I going to stay here? Is it forever? Is Australia forever for you now? Is that home?
Yeah, I think probably, I mean, we're really, really lucky because we work together and we live together and we travel together. So we're very fortunate that one of us isn't sitting at home getting frustrated because the other one's somewhere exotic. So we travel a lot back to Europe. We're doing a lot of work in Europe at the moment with CPI. We're working at, you know, in Iceland. We've worked at Keflavik in Iceland for a long time. We're working in Heathrow and Gatwick on some big projects there. We're really busy in Europe, so I'm back there a lot. And you know, you do it. You talk to people and they say, oh, you know, it's a very long way, it's a long flight. And we go, well, not really, you do it all the time, it doesn't really bother me. So I think probably the answer is maybe a bit of both. I think hopefully we'll be in the fortunate position one day to maybe be able to live part of the time in Australia and part of the time in Europe. I mean, maybe not even the UK, why not somewhere else?
Yeah. Yeah, well, New Zealand's loss was Australia's gain, Susan. That's for sure. You would have
Maybe
loved
one
it down there, though. It's a far superior country to Australia, as any Kiwi will, of course, tell you. Susan, when we were speaking offline earlier, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but often in the show we've discovered things about people, and this was something about you. Life's very fragile, as we know. I think the pandemic has really reinforced that, hasn't it? You went through your own pretty hair-raising experience when you first came to Oz. Tell us briefly about that, if you will.
Yes, I did. I got so out of the blue, I don't know how, we still don't know how, I got a Streptococcus pyogenes, which is an infection, a bacterial infection that attacked all my major organs, and I ended up in intensive care for just under 2 weeks, and it wasn't long after I'd been here, and poor Jeremy ended up being my next of kin, which is a little bit premature probably from our perspective looking back, but he sort of stepped in and took on the reins and sort of saw me through it, really. So it was a kind of a bit of a defining moment in the sense that, yeah, life is a bit fragile, and it was pretty tough on me, but as I've said, I think it was probably more tough on him because I was so sick. And I was so out of it for so long that actually the people around me were probably more traumatized. My parents had to fly out from England. They didn't know what was wrong with me. You know, it was pretty horrible. But yeah, it was an experience. But you know, it was a long time ago now, and yeah, it just makes you appreciate these. And maybe that's why, you know, we have done some crazy things. We have a bit of a saying, no what ifs. We don't like to have what ifs. You know, what if we didn't do something? What if we had? What if? So we have made some slightly harebrained decisions, and I wonder if part of that doesn't go back to, you know what, life's short. You only live once, so you know, why not?
Well, a grueling story, but fortunately a very, very happy ending, and that's good. Now, Susan, we were going to ask you when we were planning this, what's Susan Gray do when she isn't working? Well, I might ask that in a moment, but I'm not sure you ever stop, because you've told me before, but I also looked up your role as a hotelier, accidental hotelier, as you referred to it earlier. You're a co-owner, if I'm saying it right, of the Dromedary Hotel in central Tilba. And I read online, I Googled it earlier on, and wow, what a story. It's a historic village in New South Wales. It's actually classified under the National Trust. It's one of Australia's best heritage sites. And your hotel is no ordinary hotel either. So tell us how all that came about. And if you aren't always working, what do you do?
I don't know, Martin, 5 years in, I still sometimes look at Jeremy and say, I cannot believe we bought a pub. I just don't know what we were thinking. But I have to say, it's been the most amazing experience. I mean, probably one of the silliest and probably one of the best decisions we ever made. The very short story is my parents used to come out every year for several weeks. I'd take them on holiday, you know, Hamilton Island, blah, blah, blah. One year I said, let's go down the coast, south of Sydney. Off we drive, and we end up in this town called Central Tilborough. I made them go glamping, which is a whole other story, very funny, with your parents in their late 60s, glamping in a glamping tent. But anyway, and we went to Central Tilborough, and the pub was for sale. And I sent Jeremy a photo, and I said, the pub's for sale in this gorgeous little tourist town. It's a beautiful, preserved, very authentic town in the foothills of the Gulaga National Park. So the town sits literally below the mountain, which is Mother Gulaga, who's very sacred to the local Yuin First Nations people. And most of the buildings are, you know, 120 odd years old, and the pub is the only pub in town, and it's one of the original buildings, and it was for sale. And I sent Jeremy a picture, and he said, oh, wait, I think my aunt used to run that pub, because he does have connections down there. His dad actually grew up down on the south coast when he was a small boy. So his aunt replied, yes, I did used to run that pub. If you buy it, I will run it for you. So much longer story later, she and another local man who used to manage it ended up taking it on for us and managing it for us for 3 years. And now it's actually run by other local members of the family and friends from down there. It's become, it's a massive distraction, but it's an incredibly rewarding experience. It's a small community. The pub is the lounge room of the town. It's really, you know, Friday night, tonight, they'll all be down there, all the locals. They pick the kids up from school. The kids play cricket in the street. The parents will have some beers on the veranda. I book all live music every Sunday afternoon. I book all of that remotely, and we all go down there and work. So all the family go down. Jeremy's sister's coming down to work the Easter weekend for us, or help us out over the Easter weekend, I should say. You know, just it's a real family community down there, but it's also a very popular tourist destination. So we have massive influx of tourists. So it's quite an undertaking. And since we took it on, it's fair to say it's gone from it's just gone from strength to strength, and it's been a roller coaster 5 years, because we first of all had the bushfires, and we nearly lost the whole town several times, and that was, there's still a lot of trauma actually in the community around that whole thing. And then we had COVID, so we actually don't know what normal looks like. We just roll with it.
Yeah, you say it's a tourist attraction. Looking on your site, I came across a gem of a sentence or two. It said, you can pose for the paparazzi at Bullshit Corner, one of the most photographed spots in town. Susan, tell us about Bullshit Corner, if you will.
I mean, the funny thing is, it's so authentic. You couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, I didn't put Bullshit Corner there. It just, somebody, and this is the thing, the locals do it. The owners of the pub don't do it. The locals own this pub, well, they think they do, and they sort of do. I mean, we're only the caretakers of this place. It's 127 years old now. Hopefully it will be there another 127 years. So, you know, it is. Do you remember that film, The Money Pit, with John Hanks and Shelley Long, where he goes slowly mad because he's spending all this money on this crazy old building? That's Jeremy and I, basically, because it just eats money. This place is heritage. It's a nightmare. But, you know, the locals feel like they really own this place. So, you know, if someone dies, they put their memorials up in the bar, and, you know, it's got a huge meaning to everybody. And so Bullshit Corner, I don't even know where Bullshit Corner came from, but of course, in the days now of Instagram and Facebook, it's a beautiful piece of marketing, because everyone gets their picture taken and posts it on the socials themselves, having a drink at Bullshit Corner.
Roger, you and I are headed down there soon.
I'm just looking. I've got to admit, I'm just looking at it now. So I couldn't wait till the end of the podcast. So I quickly just fired it up and had a quick look at it. So it looks up on my time.
It's a fantastic area. I mean, it's, you know, we're about, you know, just about a kilometre from the ocean. There's untouched, you know, beautiful, pristine beaches, national park, lots of local First Nations culture. You know, it's a very creative area, lots of live music, you know, musicians and artists, and eccentric people. It's a really fascinating place. So it's really, really enhanced our lives. But the good thing for us, I would always say, is we're quite lucky because we're really central to the community. We're completely involved, but we get to leave again quite often. So, we don't get sort of sucked into all the day-to-day. Although having said that, I have ended up as the president of the local chamber. So that's a whole other story.
There you go, Susan. All right. Well, great. Well, we might head down to your hotel at some point, I think, Roger, and encounter it. Just close out this first part of the program, though, Susan. What a journey you've been on through life and career. Tell us about anyone that stood out to you as a key influence or a mentor, indeed, in life. I think you've touched on one or two already.
I have. I mean, definitely Paul and Doug both gave me some amazing opportunities. And I suppose, obviously, my dad, he has handed over, he's allowed us to take on a business that he created. And, what a legacy. He really was the first person to actually acknowledge and realize there was a market for specialist airport commercial consultancy, created a business, and has had no ego or any kind of sensitivity over the fact that we've now taken this business on and actually evolved it so much that it's pretty much not recognizable. I mean, the way we do things, the methodology, the industry, the approach we take, in optimizing, I mean, even just use of language like passenger experience or guest experience. I mean, that wasn't even something that we considered back in even 5 or 10 years ago. So I think he's been really generous to allow us to take things on and really kind of evolve the business to become, even more successful. So I'm quite sort of proud of him for that as well. And I guess the other thing is Jeremy has been a fantastic partner in all of these endeavours. I mean, CPI wouldn't be what it is without him. So we do make a great team, and we love what we do. And so I think it wouldn't be the same without him either, obviously.
Right. Okay. Well, Susan, we're going to take you to Tripod's resident desert island. It has duty-free status, of course, as you'd expect from us. We're going to fly you there on our distinctly low-cost carrier called Tripod Airlines, but we're going to give you some creature comforts while you're out there in this little slice of paradise. We're going to start, of course, with duty-free. We've got to support our industry, so we're going to let you have 2 duty-free items to take the island with you. What would they be and why?
Okay, well, I had to think about this because I am really a perfume, not to be a stereotype, but I am a perfume and cosmetics buyer in airports, and I do like to buy and stock up. But on a desert island, or if I'm going on a desert island, I'm not going to need perfume or cosmetics. So I thought perhaps some very nice sunglasses, some nice new sunnies, because it's I'm going somewhere nice. Or just mainly some champagne, I think would be good. And then the other thing I would buy is something local. So I would actually buy something of the place that I was in. So even if I perhaps hadn't tried it, something that was specific to that location that I would have a go at because I couldn't get it anywhere else.
Yeah. Push you a bit. Any brands in particular that might stand out?
No, I mean, in Sydney, for example.
What's a great local spirit, say, down in Oz?
I would buy a gin, probably. I'd buy like a local gin, like an Archie Rose, or Four Pillars or something from Australia, I think. Maybe one of the kind of limited editions or the flavoured ones or something. We actually do our own gin as well at the pub, but we don't sell it. No, we definitely don't sell it in duty free. But I think I'd buy a nice gin, local gin.
Fantastic. So you've got your gin and you've got your cosmetics. Whilst you're on our desert island relaxing, there is no bullshit corner. So maybe we could create that. What music would you have on the island? So either an album or a song, Susan?
This is hard, but because I have a very eclectic choice in music, taste in music, but I think I would probably take something nice and chilled out. Like there's an Australian band called Hollow Coves, and they have a song called Blessings, that what they wrote during COVID, because things were getting a bit tough for everybody, and they wrote a very uplifting, very lovely song with some beautiful lyrics about basically everyone being grateful for what they've got, and how times are tough, but actually there's some good things we can see in all of this, and the lyrics are really lovely. So I think it's a really beautiful song, and they've got some other lovely songs as well, but that one in particular, so I would take that.
Fantastic. We'll have to look that one up, Martin.
Yeah.
No, I heard. And alongside your music, what choice of reading would you bring? It can be a poem, it can be a book, your choice.
This is also very hard, because I do read a lot, but I read a vast variety of things. So I decided on a book that I thought, well, what do I reread? Because I'm not going to take a chance on something new in case it's rubbish. I'm stuck on an island with a book I don't want. So I chose Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which again, I don't know if you're familiar with that book. But it's the sort of only book that I've reread through my life, probably. And it's also the only book that I've run out and bought extra copies of to give to people, because I think everyone should read it. And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically around, he was a man who survived the concentration camps during the Holocaust, and he wrote a book. And his central sort of tenet in the book was that you can choose your attitude. The one last freedom everybody has in life, regardless of what happens to them, is you get to choose your attitude to life. And I think it's a very, very good moral and central tenet for everyone's life. Really, you get to choose your attitude no matter what happens to you.
Yeah, that book was first quoted to me, Susan, by a man called Fraser Dunlop. I don't know if you remember him from World Duty Free. He was the man that beat all the odds of cancer. He was given months to live as a young guy in a very senior role at World Duty Free. Impossible to beat. Secondary spread everywhere. And for many years, it ended sadly, unfortunately, because ultimately it came back. But he did beat it. Went into complete remission. He was called a miracle man, and he quoted that book to me, and a particular line out of a book. I'm trying to recall it, but we did an interview when we first launched the Moodie Davitt e-Zine, and I'd just come out of chemo, having been through cancer myself, as you know, in 2010, 2011, and there was I talking. I was looking frail as heck. And I was talking to this guy who had it far, far worse than me and had no right to still be on the planet. And there he was. He inspired so many people. And that reference to the book brings that right back. So a really very good choice. Susan, if the questions until now have been hard, this one's going to be a real humdinger. We're going to give you a dinner party on the island because you've been alone for a while. Roger and I, waiters supreme, sommeliers supreme. We'll be serving some fine wine and food. You can choose any 3 guests to be with you. They can be from history or they can be living today. Who would they be and why would they be your guests?
Okay, this is actually relatively easy because I've thought about this many times over the years, because I think Dolly Parton is one of my heroes. I definitely have Dolly there. I think her story and the things she does in her life would be fascinating. I think she'd be very entertaining, and I'd love the chance to meet her. I think she'd be great company. So she's one of my heroes. And the second one would be Tim Minchin. I don't know if you know Tim Minchin, but Tim Minchin, he wrote the musical Matilda. He's a very, very talented singer, songwriter, comedian, social commentator, very, very smart man, originally from Perth in WA. Yeah, just a very entertaining man. I think he and Dolly would get on great, and I find him very entertaining as well. I'd love to spend a couple of hours chatting to Tim and Dolly. And then the other one, just to kind of mix it up a bit, would be Noam Chomsky, because he's also one of my heroes. He's the greatest man alive, and the greatest mind alive as far as I'm concerned. And I think Noam Tim and Dolly, I think they would have ball at a party together, because I think they could all find some common ground, I think.
What about that, Roger? That's an interesting party, and of course, some great music could be going on throughout the evening.
It looks good. So alongside your dinner party, as a thank you for coming on the show, nearly giving us an hour of your time, we always let people fly on Tripod Airlines, which is a 5-star rated airline. And you get to pick anywhere in the world off your bucket list you'd like to go. I know you've worked heavily at Manchester Airport, my hometown and my home airport. So maybe you want to pick that, but you can pick anywhere you'd like to go.
I've been there so many times, you know. I think probably, you know, I could probably skip it this time. Not that I wouldn't love to go back, and I can't wait to go back and see the second half of the development, because it's beautiful when you see your work coming to life like that. I would go somewhere where I can go on a long hike. I think I would go back to the Midwest of the US and go hiking in the desert, I think, for several days in the middle of nowhere. Or maybe hike Machu Picchu. I've tried to do that. We were in Peru doing a training course for Lima Airport when COVID happened, and we had flights to Cusco booked. We had the hike up to Machu Picchu booked. It was all sorted, and we ended up having to do the evacuation straight back to Sydney, last flight out, everything locked down, and here we are 3 years later, and I still haven't been to Machu Picchu. So I think probably I'd like to have another go at Machu Picchu. So maybe I'd fly to Peru and do that, and then Manchester afterwards.
Yeah, I saw that you were part of because Martin, I don't know if you know, Manchester, there's Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, and probably Susan might be able to correct me, but the first time I've ever heard of an airport merging their 2 terminals into one, and Susan has led that piece of work.
Yeah, it was a pretty big piece of work. I mean, what happened was there's a whole other story, but they were quite well advanced in the planning, and then they asked us to give some input, and we did our usual exercise of how much space do you need, and what categories, and we went back and said we don't think you've got enough space. So there was a lot of toing and froing, and a lot of extra work was done, and we ended up planning a much bigger terminal as a consequence. And I think the outcome, the work that they've done, and we haven't delivered any, we worked as a team. What they've delivered is such a radical step change in the experience at Manchester. Not that it would be hard, because it wasn't brilliant before, I've got to say, they would acknowledge that. But I can't wait to see what they've done. It's a bit constrained at the moment, because only half of the building is open. So, and it's a bit of a strange mix from a category perspective accordingly, because we had to kind of spec the food and beverage, because we needed to feed people while the other half of the building was closed off. But when the full scheme is open, it's going to be a very impressive showcase terminal. Certainly one of the best in the UK, if not the best. Don't tell Heathrow or Gatwick I said that.
All right. Well, we wish you good luck with that project and with all your projects, Susan. CPI is really a much respected name in our industry, and you've carried the flag forward from Frank, your dad, who's a wonderful man, big help to journalists such as me and you and Doug Newhouse in our earlier days, and we remember those. Good luck with the Dromedary Hotel.
Thank you.
I hope to see you pulling a pint for me in the future. And
come and have a beer. 5 hours south of Sydney. You can do it.
We might just do that with great relish. But it's been fun to chat with you, Susan, and we've discovered things about you and so will our audience, as we always do on Tripod. So thanks for being such a good sport.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan.
Roger, I'll let you sign off.
Cheers.
Susan, it was amazing. Thank you. Such a varied career. Martin keeps bringing guests on that have been journalists. It's starting to scare me how many people he knows. But see your transition from journalism to commercial, and then obviously to the family business, and develop it as you have, is just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really nice to see your career, and also you sharing some of the personal side as well, because I know that must have been really hard for you and your partner.
No, thank you. No, Thanks.
Susan, take good care and thanks for being on Tripod. See you soon. Okay, Roger, that was Susan Gray. I've known Susan for about a quarter of a century through her journalistic days, her PR days and communication days at SSP, and of course with CPI, which she does a terrific job with. She's a really nice woman, very, very professional in all she does. And we learnt a lot about her, highly intelligent, highly insightful. I thought it was a delightful chat, if you like.
Yeah, first time I met Susan, it was a great to hear her story. And again, another guest of ours that has just pivoted in their career. It puts me to shame, actually, Martin, to hear how many of these people that have just done complete changes in their career, actually. And they're not easy, they're really not easy. I think people just go, oh yeah, I was in journalism, and then I went into the commercial world in communications, and then I set up my own business, or in Susan's case, joined the family business, but as she said, completely evolved it. That's not easy to do. Plus, with all of the family stuff she shared and the location change, she's a remarkable woman. And it was a privilege to get to listen to her story for the last 30, 40 minutes.
It was indeed, Roger. Very enjoyable, very insightful, very warm interview. We'll look forward to seeing you again, virtually, hopefully in the flesh sometime in the coming months during our respective travels. Meantime, take good care, Roger, and we'll see you next time. This is Martin Moodie saying, see you from Tripod.
See you next time.